Leave my property right now, you black ape!
Don't you dare yell at my mama like that.
The fist hit the door like a sledgehammer. Bang, bang, bang. 7:30 in the morning, and Mr. Richard Davidson was standing in the hallway of a rundown apartment building, his face twisted with rage, an eviction notice clenched in his hand. Behind the door, Angela Johnson froze in terror. And standing between them, blocking the entrance with her slight frame, was 16-year-old Debby Johnson. $3,200 in back rent. 48 hours to pay or get out. A mother on the verge of collapse. A teenage girl who'd just become the only thing standing between her family and homelessness. But Mr. Davidson had no idea who he was messing with. Because what happened next would expose a conspiracy of greed, ignite a fight for justice, and prove that sometimes the most powerful weapon isn't money or influence. It's courage. And this 16-year-old was about to show a corrupt landlord exactly what that meant. Welcome to Living Black Stories. Here we share powerful and inspiring tales of resilience, strength, and triumph. If you love stories that empowers and motivates you, please join us. Don't forget to subscribe, hit the notifications bell, and tell us where you are watching from in the comments. If stories about standing up to injustice inspire you, hit that subscribe button right now because what's coming will blow your mind. Let me tell you who these people really are, because understanding this moment means understanding their lives. Debby Johnson was 16 years old, a junior at Lincoln High School, carrying a 3.8 GPA while juggling 15 hours a week at the neighborhood library. She wasn't just any teenager. She was the kind of kid who woke up at 6 every morning to make breakfast for her mother, packed both their lunches, and headed out with a backpack full of textbooks and a heart full of worry. She was an honor student, yes, but more than that, she was a daughter who'd watched her mother sacrifice everything and knew that one day, she'd have to be strong enough to protect her. That day had come. Her mother, Angela Johnson, was a warrior in her own right. A single mother who worked double shifts as a nurse aide at Mercy General Hospital, coming home every night with swollen feet and an exhausted smile that never quite reached her eyes anymore. For 6 years she'd been the perfect tenant. Rent paid on the first of every month without fail. No complaints. No drama. Just a hard-working woman trying to give her daughter a stable home in a world that kept trying to knock them down. She kept their small 2-bedroom apartment immaculate, even though the building around them was falling apart. Peeling paint. Broken heating. Leaking pipes. But Angela never complained. She just worked harder. The apartment itself was modest, tucked on the 3rd floor of a 12-unit building in a neighborhood where people knew struggle and understood survival. The walls were covered with family photos, snapshots of happier times. And there, prominently displayed in the living room, was a portrait that told you everything you needed to know about this family. Sergeant James Johnson in full military dress uniform. Debby's father. A man who'd served his country with honor and died 6 years ago, leaving behind a widow and a 10-year-old daughter who still looked at his picture every single day and heard his voice telling her to stand up for what's right. Then there was Mr. Richard Davidson. 54 years old with slicked-back gray hair that probably cost more to maintain than his tenants spent on food each month. He owned 7 rental properties across the city, and his reputation preceded him. Cold. Calculating. Cruel. He wore expensive suits, flashed a Rolex that caught the light like a trophy, and drove a BMW that cost more than most of his tenants made in a year. To him, people weren't people. They were income streams. Apartments weren't homes. They were investments. And when those investments stopped performing, you cut your losses and moved on. No mercy. No compassion. Just business. Angela Johnson was Unit 3B. A number on a spreadsheet. And when her number started showing red, Davidson didn't see a woman who'd been loyal for 6 years. He saw a problem that needed to be eliminated. 3 months ago, everything started falling apart. January hit hard that year. The coldest winter in a decade, and the heating system in Davidson's building broke down. Angela called him 5 times. 5 times she explained that the temperature in the apartment was dropping dangerously low. 5 times she got the same response, delivered in that dismissive tone that made it clear he didn't care. I'll send someone next week. Next week never came. The apartment stayed freezing. Debby and Angela slept in layers of clothing under every blanket they owned. And Angela, already pushing herself past exhaustion with those double shifts, started getting sick. A cough at first, then chills, then fever. Within days she was in the emergency room, and doctors delivered the diagnosis: severe pneumonia. 2 weeks in the hospital. 2 weeks hooked up to oxygen. 2 weeks of Debby sitting in school, pretending everything was fine while her insides twisted with terror that she was about to lose the only parent she had left. 2 weeks without pay. 2 weeks of medical bills stacking up like a death sentence. When Angela finally came home, weak and barely able to climb the stairs to their third-floor apartment, she found 3 months of bills waiting for her. Rent, utilities, hospital co-pays, insurance premiums. The numbers swam before her eyes and she knew the truth immediately. She was drowning and there was no lifeline in sight. She picked up the phone with shaking hands and called Mr. Davidson. Her voice was barely above a whisper as she explained everything. The pneumonia, the hospital stay, the lost wages, 6 years of perfect payments, 6 years of being the ideal tenant. She wasn't asking for forgiveness, just time, just a payment plan, just a shred of human decency. Davidson's response came fast and cold. Mrs. Johnson, your personal problems aren't my concern. Rent is due in full by the end of the month, or I'll begin eviction proceedings. Angela hung up and cried for the first time in years. But there was something Angela didn't know. Something Debbie would discover that would make everything make sense in the most enraging way possible. A development company had approached Davidson 8 weeks earlier with an offer that made his eyes light up with greed. They wanted to buy his building, tear it down, build luxury condos. The payout was massive. Life-changing money. Retirement money. The kind of deal that comes once in a lifetime. But there was a catch. The developers needed the building empty. No tenants to relocate. No legal complications. Just vacant units ready for demolition. So Davidson made a decision that revealed exactly who he was. He'd force everyone out. He stopped responding to repair requests. Let the building deteriorate. Manufactured code violations. Raised rents beyond what people could afford. And when that wasn't enough, eviction notices. Mass eviction notices. 8 families. 8 households. 8 groups of human beings about to lose everything because one man wanted to cash a check. Angela Johnson and Debbie. Mr. Chin, the 72-year-old retired schoolteacher on the 2nd floor who'd lived there for 15 years. A young couple on the 4th floor, 8 months pregnant with their first child. A single father on the 3rd floor trying to raise 2 kids on a warehouse worker's salary. All of them got the same piece of paper. 48 hours. Thousands in back rent. Pay or leave. Debbie came home from school on a Tuesday afternoon and saw the eviction notice taped to their door. Her stomach dropped. Her hands went numb. She ripped it down and burst through the door to find her mother sitting at the kitchen table, shoulders shaking, tears streaming down her face, that piece of paper trembling in her hands. Angela looked up at her daughter, and the shame in her eyes was unbearable. Baby, I'm so sorry. I failed you. I tried so hard but I failed. We're going to have to find somewhere else to live. For a moment, Debbie just stood there, feeling the weight of the world crushing down on her 16-year-old shoulders. She thought about her father. About the uniform in that photograph. About the values he'd instilled in her before he died. About courage and justice and standing up even when you're terrified. She thought about being 16 with nowhere to go. About her mother's health. About sleeping in shelters or worse. About losing the only home she'd known since her father died. And then she thought about Mr. Davidson and his Rolex and his BMW and his complete lack of humanity. Something hardened inside her. Something that felt like steel. Mom, Debbie said, and her voice was steady in a way that surprised them both. I'm going to fix this. Angela shook her head, wiping her tears. Honey, there's nothing to fix. He's the landlord. He has all the power. We have nothing. We have the law, Mom. And I'm going to learn it. That night, Debbie didn't sleep. She sat at the kitchen table with her laptop, diving into a world she'd never explored. Tenant rights. Housing codes. Eviction procedures. She read legal websites until the words blurred. She took notes until her hand cramped. She watched YouTube videos from legal aid organizations. She downloaded city housing regulations. And slowly, piece by piece, she started seeing cracks in Davidson's armor. The eviction notice said 48 hours, but state law required 30 days minimum notice for non-payment evictions. He hadn't provided proper documentation of the debt. He hadn't followed correct legal procedures. And as Debbie dug deeper, pulling up public records and city databases, she found something that made her heart race. Mr. Richard Davidson, the man demanding thousands from struggling families, was 2 years behind on property taxes. The man who claimed he needed rent money to maintain the building had 17 open code violations filed against him by the city that he'd completely ignored. Broken heating systems. Mold. Electrical hazards. Water damage. Everything Angela and the other tenants had complained about was documented. On record. Proof that he was a slumlord who'd been exploiting people for years. Debby printed everything. Every regulation. Every public record. Every piece of evidence she could find. And then she made a decision that would change everything. She started knocking on doors. Mr. Chin answered first, surprise crossing his weathered face when he saw the teenager from 3B standing in his hallway at 9 o'clock at night. "Mr. Chin," Debby said, holding up her papers. "Did you get an eviction notice too?" His eyes filled with tears. He nodded slowly. 48 hours. I don't know where to go. I've lived here 15 years. This is my home. The single father with 2 kids. Same notice. The pregnant couple on the 4th floor. Same deadline. Same impossible demand. Same terror. 8 families. All facing the same injustice. All believing they were alone. All convinced they had no power. Debby showed them her research. Explained what she'd found. Told them about Davidson's unpaid taxes and code violations. Showed them the laws he'd broken. "What if we fight together?" she asked, her voice growing stronger with each conversation. "What if we organize? What if we refuse to be intimidated?" Mr. Chin looked at her with hope and doubt warring in his eyes. "We're just tenants. What can we do against someone like him?" Debby thought about her father again. About everything he'd taught her. About justice and courage and the idea that change starts when ordinary people decide they've had enough. "We can do everything," she said. "We just have to be willing to fight." The next morning, when Davidson came pounding on that door, screaming threats and waving papers, demanding money and promising to throw them onto the street, he thought he was dealing with just another powerless tenant who'd crumble under pressure. He was about to learn he was dead wrong. When Debby opened that door and planted herself between him and her mother, she wasn't just a scared teenager anymore. She was someone who'd spent the entire night arming herself with knowledge. Someone who'd organized every tenant in the building. Someone who'd discovered all his dirty secrets. Someone who was about to turn his own weapons against him. Davidson looked down at this 16-year-old girl and sneered. "Get out of my way, kid. This is between me and your mother." Debby didn't move. "Actually, Mr. Davidson, this is between you and the law. And we're not going anywhere." His face went red. "You have 48 hours to pay $3,200, or your belongings hit the curb. Do you understand me?" "I understand that you're violating state housing law," Debby said calmly. "I understand that you haven't provided proper notice. I understand that you're 2 years behind on property taxes while demanding rent from families you've been exploiting. And I understand that you're about to regret ever threatening my mother." For just a moment, something flickered in Davidson's eyes. Surprise. Maybe even fear. But then his arrogance came roaring back. "You're just a stupid kid playing lawyer," he snarled. "You have no idea who you're dealing with." Debby met his eyes without flinching. "Neither do you." After he left, still spewing threats and promises of destruction, Angela grabbed her daughter's hand, terrified. "Baby, you're going to make him angry. He'll make it worse for us." Debby squeezed her mother's hand back, and when she spoke, her voice carried a strength that reminded Angela so much of her late husband it made her chest ache. "Mom, Dad didn't raise a quitter. And I'm not about to start now. What would you do if you were Debby? Would you fight back against impossible odds, or would you walk away to avoid making things worse? Let me know in the comments. Because what Debby Johnson was about to do would shake that building to its foundation, expose corruption that had been festering for years, and prove that sometimes the most dangerous person in any fight isn't the one with power and money. It's the one with nothing left to lose and everything to fight for. Debby's part-time job at the library was about to become the most valuable weapon in this fight. While other teenagers were scrolling social media after school, Debby was sitting at a computer terminal surrounded by legal books, tenant rights manuals, and housing code regulations. She had access to databases, legal resources, and case law that most people never even knew existed. And she was using every single tool at her disposal. The first breakthrough came within hours. State housing law was crystal clear. Landlords must provide 30 days written notice for eviction due to non-payment of rent. Not 48 hours. 30 days. Davidson's eviction notice was illegal from the start. He was counting on his tenants not knowing the law. Counting on their fear and desperation to keep them silent. But Debby wasn't silent. And she wasn't stopping there. She found tenant forums online where Davidson's name appeared again and again. Complaint after complaint. A single mother on the east side who'd been evicted in winter with 2 days' notice. A disabled veteran who'd had his utilities shut off without warning. An elderly couple who'd been charged illegal fees and threatened when they questioned them. The pattern was unmistakable. Davidson had been doing this for years, targeting vulnerable people who didn't know how to fight back. Debby printed everything, documented everything, built a file that was growing thicker by the hour. Then she went back to the building and started knocking on doors again. This time with purpose. This time with proof. Mr. Chin opened his door and Debby showed him the complaints. It's not just us. He's been doing this to people for years. The single father with 2 kids looked at the legal statutes Debby had printed. So the eviction notice is fake? It's illegal, Debby corrected. And if we stand together, we can stop him. The pregnant couple on the 4th floor were terrified, but when Debby explained what she'd found, hope flickered in their eyes for the first time in weeks. One by one, the tenants started to understand. Alone, they were powerless. Together, they were a force. Debby organized a meeting in Mr. Chen's apartment. 8 families crammed into a small living room, sharing their stories. The rent increases that came without warning. The repairs that were requested but never done. The harassment. The intimidation. The threats. And Debby laid out a plan. We document everything. We organize. We fight this legally. He thinks we're powerless, but we have rights. And we're going to use them. For the first time since this nightmare began, the tenants didn't look defeated. They looked determined. But Davidson wasn't going to take this lying down. 2 days later, he showed up at the building with a man in a suit carrying a clipboard. Davidson announced loudly in the hallway that this was an official building inspector conducting a safety inspection. The man went door to door, taking notes, shaking his head, citing violations that didn't exist. Cracked paint. Improper storage. Fire hazards that weren't there. When he got to Debby's apartment, he barely looked around before declaring, multiple code violations. This unit is unfit for habitation. Debby stared at him. That's not true. What violations? The man wouldn't meet her eyes. I've documented everything. You'll receive official notice. Davidson stood in the hallway with his arms crossed, a smug smile on his face. After the fake inspector left, he approached Debby's door. Still want to play lawyer, little girl? Debby stepped into the hallway and despite being half his size, she didn't back down an inch. We know what you're doing, Mr. Davidson. That wasn't a real inspector. His smile turned vicious. Prove it. And just so you know, if the rent isn't paid by tomorrow, I'm cutting the utilities. No heat. No water. Let's see how long you last then. That's illegal, Debby said, her voice steady. So sue me, Davidson sneered. Oh wait, you can't afford a lawyer, can you? You can't even afford rent. Debby looked him dead in the eye. We know our rights, Mr. Davidson. And we're not backing down. His face darkened. He stepped closer, his voice dropping to something cold and threatening. You're making a very big mistake, kid. You have no idea who you're dealing with. I've destroyed people bigger than you. Keep pushing me and you'll regret it. He turned and walked away, his expensive shoes echoing on the stairs. Debby went back inside and her mother grabbed her arms, panic in her eyes. Baby, please. This is getting dangerous. He's threatening us. We should just leave. Find another place. It's not worth this. Mom, where are we going to go? Debby's voice cracked slightly. We don't have money for a new apartment. We don't have money for a deposit. We don't have anything. And even if we did, how many other people is he going to do this to? How many families is he going to destroy? Angela's eyes filled with tears. I know, baby, but I'm scared. I'm scared of what he'll do to you. Debby took her mother's hands and when she spoke, her voice carried an echo of the man whose picture hung in their living room. Dad didn't raise a quitter, Mom. He taught me to stand up for what's right, even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. Angela pulled her daughter into a hug, and they stood there in their small apartment, holding on to each other like they were the only solid thing in a world that kept trying to knock them down. But Debby wasn't done researching. And what she found next would change everything. Late that night, digging through public records on the city's website, Debby discovered something that made her heart race. Davidson's property taxes. She pulled up the records for their building, and there it was in black and white, 2 years of unpaid property taxes. Tens of thousands of dollars owed to the city. The man demanding rent from struggling families hadn't paid his own bills in 2 years. She dug deeper. City code enforcement records. Violation after violation filed against the building. The heating system that had broken and never been fixed? Documented. The mold in Mr. Chen's bathroom? Documented. The electrical issues the pregnant couple had reported? Documented. 17 open violations, all filed, all ignored. Davidson had been collecting rent for a building he wasn't maintaining and wasn't even paying taxes on. He was breaking every rule while demanding everyone else follow his. Debby was printing these records when she heard a knock on the door. It was nearly midnight. Her mother was asleep. She approached carefully, checking the peephole. An older black woman stood in the hallway. Well-dressed. Intelligent eyes. Debby recognized her from the fourth floor but had never spoken to her. She opened the door cautiously. "Can I help you?" The woman smiled gently. "I'm Patricia Morrison from 4C. I've been watching what you've been doing. May I come in?" Debby let her in, curious and slightly wary. Patricia looked around at the papers spread across the kitchen table and nodded approvingly. "You've been busy. Good." Someone needed to stand up to that man. "Do you have information about Davidson?" Debby asked. Patricia's smile widened. "I have something better than information, sweetheart. I'm a retired attorney. Practiced housing law for 35 years before I retired. And I've been watching Davidson exploit people in this building for 6 months, waiting for someone to fight back." Debby's jaw dropped. "You're a lawyer?" "Was. Still am, technically. Just not actively practicing. But I still remember everything." Patricia sat down and looked at Debby's research. "This is good work. Really good. You've found his vulnerabilities. Now let me show you how to use them." For the next 2 hours, Patricia explained things Debby hadn't even considered. They didn't just have to defend against eviction. They could go on the offensive. File complaints with the housing authority. Report the unpaid taxes. Document the code violations. Sue for breach of habitability. Demand rent reduction for the months they'd lived in substandard conditions. "He owes you money," Patricia said. Not the other way around. Debby felt something shift inside her. They weren't victims anymore. They were fighters. "Why are you helping us?" Debby asked. Patricia's expression softened. "Because I've watched too many people like Davidson get away with this for too long. Because you remind me of myself at your age. And because your father was a military man, and I believe in the values he would have taught you. Honor. Justice. Courage." Debby's eyes stung with tears. "How did you know about my father?" "I pay attention, sweetheart. And I know bravery when I see it." Patricia stood up. "Tomorrow we start building a real case. Not just a defense. An attack. We're going to hit him with everything we've got. Are you ready for that?" Debby thought about her mother's tears. About Mr. Chen's fear. About the pregnant couple and the single father and everyone else Davidson had terrorized. She thought about her father and what he would do in this situation. "I'm ready," she said. Patricia smiled. "Then let's make him regret the day he ever threatened your family." If you're inspired by people who stand up to injustice, hit that subscribe button because this fight is about to get intense. What would you do if you discovered your landlord was breaking this many laws? Would you go on the offensive or just try to escape? Drop your answer in the comments below. Because Debby Johnson was about to learn that sometimes the best defense is a devastating offense. And Mr. Davidson had no idea what was coming for him. The meeting in Mr. Chen's apartment felt like a war council. 8 families crammed into a small living room, but this time there was no fear in their eyes. There was determination. Patricia Morrison stood at the front, and when she spoke, decades of legal experience filled the room with authority. "Here's what most people don't understand," Patricia began. "You don't just have the right to fight eviction. You have the right to go after him. File complaints with the housing authority. Sue for habitability violations. Demand compensation for every month you've lived in substandard conditions while paying full rent." One by one the tenants pulled out their phones. The evidence was damning. Mr. Chen showed photos of black mold spreading across his bathroom ceiling, photos he'd sent to Davidson 6 months ago with no response. The pregnant couple had pictures of their broken heating unit and the space heater they'd been forced to buy themselves. Leaking pipes. Cracked windows. Exposed wiring. Then the single father spoke up, his voice shaking with anger. "He locked me out once. I was 2 days late on rent because my paycheck was delayed. I came home from work and found my locks changed. My kid's stuff was inside. He wouldn't let me in until I paid in cash, plus a $200 lock change fee." "That's illegal on multiple levels," Patricia said, taking notes. "Landlord lockouts are criminal in this state." Debby documented everything on her phone. Every photo. Every story. Every violation. The evidence was piling up into something undeniable. Patricia pulled up the city's rent control database on her laptop. She entered their address and the room went silent as the numbers appeared. "He's been overcharging you. This building is under rent control. The maximum legal rent for a 2-bedroom is $1,800. He's been charging $2,200. Gasps filled the room. Years of overpayment. Thousands of dollars per tenant. Patricia looked around at their shocked faces and smiled grimly. He doesn't just owe you compliance with the law. He owes you money. A lot of money. For the first time since this nightmare began, the tenants weren't just defending themselves. They were ready to attack. But Davidson had eyes and ears everywhere. Someone in the building talked, or maybe he just noticed the tenants gathering because the next morning he made his move. Debbie was getting ready for school when she heard heavy footsteps in the hallway. Male voices. Aggressive. Commanding. She opened the door to find 3 large men in uniforms that looked official, but something about them felt wrong. Eviction crew, one of them announced. We're here to remove belongings from Unit 3B. You can't do that, Debbie said, her heart pounding. The eviction is illegal. We have our orders, miss. Step aside. They pushed past her into the apartment. Angela emerged from her bedroom, still in her nurse's scrubs from her night shift, confusion and terror on her face. What's happening? What are you doing? The men started grabbing things. Furniture. Boxes. Personal belongings. They were throwing Angela's life into the hallway like garbage. Angela's breathing became rapid and shallow. She grabbed her chest, her face going pale. I can't breathe. Debbie rushed to her mother's side as Angela collapsed onto the couch, gasping for air. Panic attack. Blood pressure spiking. Debbie had seen this before during her mother's illness. Stop. Debbie screamed at the men. You're killing her. Get out. She grabbed her phone with shaking hands and dialed 911. My mother is having a medical emergency, and there are men illegally evicting us. Send police and an ambulance now. The men hesitated, looking at each other uncertainly. Within minutes, sirens filled the street below. Police officers arrived first, taking in the scene. The men in fake uniforms. The belongings scattered in the hallway. Angela struggling to breathe on the couch. Debbie holding her mother and crying. Who authorized this eviction? The officer demanded. The men couldn't produce proper documentation. No court order. No legal eviction notice. Nothing. This is an illegal eviction, the officer said. You need to leave now or you'll be arrested for trespassing and assault. That's when Davidson showed up, playing his role perfectly. Concerned landlord. Reasonable businessman. Victim of difficult tenants. Officers, I'm just trying to run my business. These tenants haven't paid rent in months. I have every right to protect my property. Do you have a court-ordered eviction? The officer asked. Davidson hesitated. I have an eviction notice. That's not the same thing, sir. You cannot remove tenants or their belongings without a court order. This is illegal. Davidson's mask slipped for just a moment, fury flashing in his eyes. But he recovered quickly. I didn't authorize this. These men must have misunderstood. I would never violate the law. The officer wasn't buying it, but without proof that Davidson had hired these men, there was nothing he could do. I'm warning you, sir. Stay away from this unit. Any further attempts at illegal eviction will result in criminal charges. Davidson nodded, playing the compliant citizen. But as the officers turned away, he looked directly at Debbie, and his expression promised revenge. The ambulance arrived. Paramedics checked Angela's vitals. Blood pressure dangerously high. Stress-induced hypertensive crisis. They needed to take her to the hospital. Mom, no, Debbie whispered, tears streaming down her face. Please don't leave me. Angela reached up with a weak hand and touched her daughter's face. I'm okay, baby. I just need to rest. But she wasn't okay. None of this was okay. At the hospital, Debbie sat beside her mother's bed, holding her hand and feeling more defeated than she'd ever felt in her life. They'd fought so hard, and Davidson had still found a way to hurt them. Her mother was lying in a hospital bed because of him. How much more could they take? Angela opened her eyes and saw her daughter crying. Despite the 4 in her arm and the monitors beeping around her, she squeezed Debbie's hand with surprising strength. Baby, look at me. Debbie looked up, vision blurred with tears. Your father always said that justice takes courage, Angela whispered, her voice weak but fierce. He said that the hardest battles are the ones worth fighting. And baby, you've got his courage. I see it every day. Don't you dare give up now. Something broke open inside Debbie. All the fear. All the doubt. It shattered and was replaced by something harder. Something unbreakable. She kissed her mother's hand. I'm not giving up, Mom. I'm just getting started. Debbie stepped into the hospital hallway and called Patricia. When the retired attorney answered, Debbie's voice was steady and cold with determination. Mrs. Morrison, let's file everything. Right now. I want him destroyed. I was hoping you'd say that, Patricia replied. Come to my apartment tonight. We have work to do. That night in Patricia's apartment, the two of them worked like generals planning a war. Documents spread across every surface. Legal forms. Complaint filings. Evidence logs. Debbie's fingers flew across her laptop keyboard while Patricia made phone calls, activating networks she'd built over 35 years of practice. They filed a formal complaint with the City Housing Authority, documenting every code violation, every illegal practice, every tenant Davidson had harmed. They drafted a lawsuit for breach of habitability, illegal eviction attempts, and violation of rent control laws. They prepared a complaint to the State Attorney General's office about systematic tenant abuse and potential fraud. But Patricia had one more idea. There's an investigative reporter at Channel 7. Marcus Reed. He's made a career out of exposing slumlords. This is exactly the kind of story he lives for. Debbie's eyes lit up. If this goes public, Davidson's reputation is destroyed, Patricia finished. No more hiding. No more intimidation. Everything he's done gets exposed to the whole city. Debbie spent the next 2 hours recording video testimonies from every tenant. Mr. Chin talking about the mold and the refused repairs. The single father describing the illegal lockout. The pregnant couple showing their broken heating unit. Each story more damning than the last. She compiled everything into a detailed email. Videos, photos, documents, legal filings, public records showing unpaid taxes and code violations. The complete story of Richard Davidson's corruption. At midnight, Debbie hovered her finger over the send button. This was it. The point of no return. Once she sent this, there was no going back. Davidson would know she declared total war. She thought about her mother lying in that hospital bed. About her father's picture hanging in their living room. About every family Davidson had destroyed and every family he would destroy in the future if someone didn't stop him. Debbie hit send. The email went to Marcus Reed, investigative reporter. Subject line: corrupt landlord illegally evicting families including veteran's widow. She sat back, heart pounding, and waited. If you want to see justice served, hit that subscribe button right now because what's about to happen will shock you. Have you ever had to stand up to someone with all the power? What gave you the courage to fight back? Share your story in the comments below. Because Debby Johnson had just lit a fuse, and the explosion that was coming would change everything. Davidson had made one critical mistake. He'd pushed a 16-year-old girl too far. And now she was coming for him with everything she had. Marcus Reed didn't waste a single second. The investigative reporter read Debbie's email at 6 in the morning, watched the videos, reviewed the documents, and by 9 o'clock, a news van was parked outside Davidson's building with cameras ready. Davidson arrived at the building that morning expecting another day of intimidating tenants. Instead, he found a reporter and camera crew waiting for him. Mr. Davidson, Marcus Reed from Channel 7 News. Can you comment on allegations that you've been illegally evicting families, including a veteran's widow, while failing to pay property taxes and ignoring code violations? Davidson's face went from confusion to shock to rage in seconds. I have no comment. Get that camera out of my face. We have documents showing you're 2 years behind on property taxes. Public records show 17 open code violations. Multiple tenants claim you've attempted illegal evictions. Would you like to respond? This is slander. Davidson sputtered, his composure completely shattered. I'll sue you. I'll sue that lying girl and her mother. This is harassment. So you deny the allegations? I'm a legitimate businessman being attacked by tenants who won't pay their rent. Davidson was backing away now, losing control. You're going to regret this. He stormed to his BMW and sped away, leaving the reporter standing there with perfect footage of a corrupt landlord melting down on camera. The story aired that evening. Landlord illegally evicts veteran's widow. The headline was everywhere. Local news picked it up. Social media exploded. By the next morning, Davidson's face was all over the internet, and the public outrage was massive. The Housing Authority launched an immediate investigation. Suddenly, officials who'd been ignoring complaints for years were showing up with clipboards and cameras, documenting every violation, every illegal practice, every tenant Davidson had abused. Debbie's phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Messages from neighbors. Calls from advocacy groups. Emails from lawyers offering help. The community was rallying, and it was overwhelming in the best possible way. Then came a call that made Debbie break down crying. The local veterans organization had seen the news coverage. They'd learned about Angela, about her late husband's service, about the family being targeted. And they wanted to help. We're paying your mother's back rent in full, the voice on the phone said. No veteran's family should ever face homelessness. Not on our watch. The community stepped up when it mattered most. Not because they had to, but because they saw injustice and refused to look away. 2 weeks later, Davidson received a summons he couldn't ignore. Emergency hearing with the City Housing Authority. Mandatory attendance. His lawyers told him to settle to make this go away quietly. But his arrogance wouldn't let him. He showed up ready to fight. The hearing room was packed. Debbie sat in the front row with Patricia at her side. Behind them, every tenant from the building. Mr. Chin. The single father with his 2 kids. The young couple, the woman's pregnant belly visible for everyone to see. Witnesses. Evidence. Truth. Davidson walked in wearing his most expensive suit, his lawyer beside him, confidence on his face like armor. He thought he could talk his way out of this like he'd talked his way out of everything else. He was wrong. The hearing officer laid out the evidence methodically. Public records showing 2 years of unpaid property taxes totaling $63,000. 17 documented code violations spanning 3 years. Photographs of mold, broken heating systems, leaking pipes, electrical hazards. Testimony from 8 families about harassment and illegal eviction attempts. Security footage from the building showing the fake eviction crew. Phone records proving Davidson had hired them. Rent payment records showing systematic overcharging beyond rent control limits. The evidence was crushing, undeniable, damning. Davidson tried to defend himself. These tenants are making up stories because they don't want to pay rent. I'm the victim here. Is the city making up the unpaid taxes? The hearing officer asked coldly. That's a separate issue. Are the housing inspectors making up the code violations they've documented? I was going to fix those. You've been going to fix them for 3 years while collecting full rent from families living in substandard conditions? Davidson's lawyer tried to intervene, but it was too late. The case was airtight. The hearing officer looked at Davidson with unconcealed disgust. Mr. Davidson, in 30 years of doing this job, I've rarely seen such systematic abuse of tenants. You've violated housing law, tenant protection statutes, and basic human decency. Then came the judgment, delivered like hammer blows. All eviction notices are hereby voided and declared illegal. You are fined $45,000 for housing code violations and illegal eviction attempts. You have 30 days to complete all repairs to bring the building up to code, overseen by a city-appointed inspector. You owe your tenants back payment for overcharged rent totaling approximately $32,000. This building is placed under city monitoring for a minimum of 2 years. Any further violations will result in criminal prosecution. The room erupted. Tenants crying with relief. Patricia squeezing Debbie's shoulder. Justice finally delivered. Davidson sat there, his face drained of color, his empire crumbling around him. He turned and looked directly at Debbie, and his expression was pure venom. You've ruined me, he hissed. Debbie stood up, and when she spoke, her voice carried through the entire room. No, sir. You ruined yourself. You had every opportunity to do the right thing. You chose greed over humanity. This is what happens when you forget that tenants are human beings, not income streams. Davidson had no response. He stood and left the hearing room, his lawyer trailing behind, both of them knowing this was only the beginning of his legal problems. 3 weeks later, the building was transformed. City-appointed contractors swarmed the property, fixing everything Davidson had ignored for years. New heating systems. Mold remediation. Electrical repairs. Fresh paint. It was like watching the building come back to life. Davidson couldn't afford the fines, the repairs, the back payments, and the tax debt. He was forced to sell. But here's where the story gets beautiful. A non-profit housing organization reached out to the tenants with an offer. They provide financing and legal support for the tenants to buy the building collectively and form a tenant cooperative. The residents would own their homes, make decisions together, control their own destiny. 8 families pooled their back payment money from Davidson, combined it with loans and grants, and purchased the building where they'd been terrorized for years. They weren't tenants anymore. They were owners. Angela came home from the hospital fully recovered. Back to work. Back to strength. And when she walked into their apartment and saw Debbie doing homework at the kitchen table, she pulled her daughter into the tightest hug and whispered, "I'm so proud of you, baby." Debbie hugged her back, breathing in her mother's familiar scent, feeling safe for the first time in months. Dad would have done the same thing, Mom? They both looked at the photograph on the wall. Sergeant James Johnson in his uniform, forever young, forever proud. And somehow Debbie felt like he was smiling. 6 months later, life looked completely different. Debby stood at a podium in city council chambers, speaking to officials and community members about tenant rights and how young people can make a difference. The girl who'd been terrified of a landlord was now teaching others how to fight back against injustice. Back at the building, the transformation was complete. Mr. Chin taught Tai Chi in the courtyard every morning, his gentle movements drawing neighbors who laughed and learned together. The single father's kids played safely in the repaired playground, their laughter echoing off walls that no longer held fear. The young couple walked their newborn baby through hallways that finally felt like home. Aunt Patricia mentored Debby about law school applications, seeing in this 16-year-old the future of advocacy and justice. Debby reflected on everything she'd learned. Being young doesn't mean being powerless. One person standing up can inspire others. And together we're unstoppable. I learned that courage isn't the absence of fear. It's acting despite it. I learned that justice doesn't happen by accident. It happens when ordinary people decide they've had enough and fight back. Then came the letter that changed everything again. Debby opened the envelope with shaking hands. Full academic scholarship to college. Merit-based award for community activism and leadership. 4 years fully funded, including housing and books. Angela stood beside her daughter, reading over her shoulder, and the tears came fast and overwhelming. Happy tears. Proud tears. Tears of relief and hope and love. Debby turned to her mother and they held each other like they had so many times during the hard months, but this time it was different. This time they weren't holding on out of fear. They were celebrating victory. That evening, Debby and Angela stood on their apartment balcony, watching the sun set over the city. The same balcony where they'd stood months ago, terrified and powerless. But everything had changed. This wasn't just about saving our home, Debby said softly. It was about showing that dignity isn't negotiable. That when someone tries to take it, you fight back. Not with anger but with courage and truth. You stand up even when you're scared. You organize even when you feel alone. You fight even when the odds seem impossible. Because justice is always worth fighting for. Angela squeezed her daughter's hand. Your father would be so proud. I'm so proud. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and orange and hope. And in that moment, Debby Johnson, 16-year-old honor student and warrior for justice, understood something profound. Change doesn't require wealth or power or connections. It requires courage, knowledge, and the refusal to accept injustice. One girl had stood up to a corrupt landlord. One girl had organized her community. One girl had fought back when everyone said she couldn't win. And she changed everything. Know your rights. Stand together. Justice is worth fighting for. If this story moved you, hit that like and subscribe button. And drop a comment sharing your own story of standing up to injustice. Your story matters. Your voice matters. And you have more power than you know. What injustice in your own community needs someone brave enough to fight back? Share in the comments below. Because if Debby Johnson taught us anything, it's that the size of your courage matters more than the size of your bank account. And sometimes the most powerful person in any fight isn't the one with money and influence. It's the one with nothing left to lose and everything to fight for.